At some point in our lives, most of us decide we want to leave some kind of mark on the world, to accomplish something by which to be remembered. I'm Mark Bernheimer with the story of a remarkable Newport Beach man who walked into the record books 20 years ago this month and who refuses to let the world forget about his amazing feat, pun intended. In a few minutes, we'll take you to Waseca, Minnesota to show you why Dave Kunst, the Earthwalker, returned this month to his old hometown. But first, we'll introduce you to the man and the people who helped him achieve his dream 2 decades ago. This is how we brought you the story of Dave Kunst in the fall of 1990, shortly after OCN went on the air.
You might say David Kunst has a funny way of killing time. 20 years ago, he decided to trade his middle-class lifestyle in Minnesota for an adventure that would leave him with an unprecedented first-hand account of the world around him. The idea was proposed half seriously by a friend.
And he said, that's all been done before. Why don't you do something nobody's ever done? And I said, well, what hasn't been done? It's 1970. We went to the moon in '69. He said, nobody's walked around the world.
A few short months later, David and his younger brother John took the first steps of that walk around the world. They averaged 25 miles a day, walking from coast to coast of each continent, then flying across the oceans. Along the way, the Kunst brothers acquired 2 dogs, a series of mules, and a primitive Turkish wagon. They endured temperatures ranging from 10 degrees to 128. They sampled ethnic cuisine, including roasted lizard and sheep's eyeball soup. But it wasn't all bad. In Monaco, the Kunst brothers were invited to the royal palace to meet a princess.
The guards let us in. We went into the royal courtyard, and we were pretty nervous, and Mule was with us, you know, and all of a sudden, out on the balcony comes Princess Grace, looking like not a movie actress, but looking like a princess, let me tell you. And she started down the steps with kind of a smile, and she stopped, and she said, I've met a lot of people before, but never 2 guys with a mule. Will she kick? You know,
2 full years into their walk, the Kunst brothers encountered tragedy. On a lonely mountain pass in the middle of Afghanistan, they were attacked by vicious bandits who mistakenly believed the brothers were carrying a large sum of money.
So these were murderers, and they had read about us having all this money, and they chased us down. They'd been following us for 3 days, and virtually with no warning, they attacked us and ambushed us, and that's when John was shot.
John died instantly. David was wounded and left for dead. He was discovered by Army troops the next morning, and he spent the next 4 months recuperating back in the States. After losing his brother, Kunst felt more motivated than ever to complete his Earthwalk, but not alone. He remembered a promise that his other brother, Pete, had made when David and John began their journey.
I promised that if anything happened, I'd help the other one finish, and Dave says, well, you ready to help me finish? And I says, you bet.
They resumed the Earthwalk from the exact spot in Afghanistan where John had been killed. Pete stayed with David for the next year, walking through Pakistan and India, and then continuing in Australia. But Pete's time was not unlimited, and halfway through Australia, he had to return to the States on business. It was then that David remembered a school teacher he had met when the brothers first arrived in Australia.
I was on my own in Australia with the mule, and the mule died of a heart attack. And then I was there with the wagon, and I thought, oh no, is this going to be another 2.5 months to get another mule and train the mule? So I called Jenny in Perth, 2,000 miles away, and I said, Jenny, could you possibly, you know, take the place of the mule and drive 2,000 miles and hook up to the wagon and help me make it the rest of the way across Australia?
With his third and final companion driving at 4 miles an hour by his side, Kunst made it across Australia. Later, he made Jenny his wife.
For me, it was easy to understand why he did this thing. I mean, Americans just are very adventurous people, and they always want to be the first, you know, to do something. And 2 crazy Yanks, here they are, you know.
After successfully crossing Australia with Jenny, Kunst finished the final leg of his odyssey alone. He flew to Newport Beach and walked the final 1,800 miles back to Waseca, Minnesota. The Earthwalk required 4 years, 3 months, and 16 days, not to mention 22 pairs of shoes. It landed Kunst in the Guinness Book of World Records and Ripley's Believe It or Not. Of course, it all came at great cost, but David Kunst says he has no regrets, and he doesn't believe his brother John would either.
See, John told me, he said, I love walking around the world. It's a great adventure, and if I die walking around the world, you tell Mom and Dad I died happy. And I felt the same way.
Today, David keeps himself busy with an early morning paper route. He also manages a small apartment complex with Jenny, who teaches in Irvine. But now that he's seen much of the world, his favorite place to be is standing in front of a classroom, explaining to wide-eyed youngsters how he got up one June morning 20 years ago and set out to walk around the earth.
Kunst had plenty of opportunities to tell his story during this month's Minnesota homecoming, and he had something else on his agenda too. He wanted to recreate the final steps of his journey to commemorate the 20th anniversary of his walk. And like the first walk, this one contained some surprises. We'll show you when we come. David Kunst's life hasn't changed too much since our story 4 years ago. He's still married to Jenny, still wakes up at 3:30 every morning for his paper route, and he still loves to relive that earth walk. Strangers who ask about his adventure had better have more than a few minutes to spare. As part of that effort to keep his story alive, Kunst returned to Minnesota to talk about his odyssey and to walk into the center of Waseca, just as he had done 20 years to the day earlier.
Although he was commemorating a rather personal journey, Kunst was determined to make sure the anniversary was a very public event. The one-man PR machine was in full gear even before the trip when Dave and Pete appeared on the Lisa Show as part of a program called Believe It or Not. Once he arrived in Minnesota by van, Kunst spent days arranging interviews for just about every Minnesota newspaper, television station, and radio station that was interested. The Earthwalker was back, and he wanted everyone to know it. He also wanted to share his tale with new audiences. He found one at the Minnesota Historical Society in St. Paul.
Walked around the world and he said, no way, it's not in the Guinness Book of World Records. And I said, well, I'm going to do it. Now, he didn't believe I was going to do it, but I knew I was going to do it, and I knew my brother John would do it. He was going to the University of Minnesota. And so I went to see my brother John 2 days later up at the U of M, and I told him the idea, and the very first thing he said, we're going to do it, aren't we? I said, John, we're going to do this, but if we don't want to be like a lot of other people that get a great idea and they say someday, 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 we have to set a date. So we set the date right then and there, you know, kind of like set your goal. We set the date. This was January. We set the date for June 20th, 1970. We would walk out of Waseca, Minnesota, ready or not, and we did that, and we walked around the world.
After the lecture, a surprise. An old friend who had first met the brothers in Afghanistan. He now lives in Minnesota and had come by to say hello after more than 20 years.
So what did you think of these guys when you first met them in Afghanistan? Crazy Americans or what?
I wouldn't say crazy, courageous, you know, having guts and courage to do that. And I'm very much like them, you know, like I like to travel. I have been in 45 different countries. So when people like them, you know, but they took lots of risk. I wouldn't take that kind of, you know, risk. They took risk and, you know, all those dangers. And they traveled, and I admire them and I respect them for that.
The next night, Kunst was at it again. As rain pounded outside, Kunst raced through a slideshow for Boy Scouts and other youngsters at a community center in St. Paul. Earlier in the day, Kunst had taken us on an unexpected stop by the Minnesota Historical Society's warehouse. Inside, looking exactly as it must have 20 years ago, was the Kunst brothers' trusty Turkish wagon, still holding many of the supplies from the Earthwalk.
And then
So where did you sleep? Show me where you slept.
Okay, well, one person would actually sleep on this box right here that I'm sitting on. Of course, we had nice down-filled sleeping bags, you know, so it was comfortable, but just narrow, right? And I'd sleep down here, but it wasn't quite that roomy for me. We had a lot of other stuff in the wagon, you know, so I mean, there was plenty of stuff in there, so it was a tight squeeze for me. But,
so Pete got to sleep up there, and you had to sleep
and John, too. So.
Although Dave had seen the wagon just a few years ago, his brother Pete hadn't seen it since the end of the walk.
It certainly brings back some memories.
What kind of memories? Good memories, bad?
Good memories. Good memories. Adventurous. Always looking forward to the next stop, the next city. Of course, eventually getting home.
Wednesday, October 5th, the big day. It begins in Waseca, about 60 miles outside of St. Paul, with a family reunion. Dozens of aunts, uncles, cousins, and friends converge on the cemetery where Dave's brother John Kunst is buried. The local media are here too, and Kunst is getting in a few last-minute plugs.
Final walk.
His relatives have come from as far away as Wisconsin, but there is little sadness at the cemetery. It's more a day of celebration than a day of mourning.
I just want to, you know, thank everybody for coming today. And, of course, for those who don't know and haven't looked around, this is where my brother John lies, the adventurous spirit we're going to take with us. He's always been with me, I must tell you, but kind of like pick up his adventurous spirit and walk through Waseca today on this special occasion.
Eventually, the crowd leaves the cemetery and heads for a predetermined spot a mile outside of town. A borrowed mule completes the preparations, and at 3 o'clock sharp, the walk is on. From the very beginning, it's clear the mule doesn't fully appreciate the importance of this symbolic event.
Come on, Dutch, come on.
As the crowd walks and watches nervously a few steps behind, Kunst tries to reason with his uncooperative four-legged partner.
You got spirit, animal. That's good. We're not worried about that. Just take it a little easy, huh? You know, I can't walk as fast as I could before. I hate to tell you this, Dutch, but, whoa, 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 Dutch. Whoa, Dutch. Whoa, Dutch.
The mule, it seems, is determined to live up to its stereotype. And what was supposed to be a leisurely stroll into downtown Waseca becomes more of a sprint, with the mule leading Kunst, as well as a pack of breathless reporters and photographers. Finally, as the path takes them off the busy highway and into town, Dutch the mule calms down and slows down long enough for Kunst to answer a single question. What had prompted this Orange County man to drive across half the country and recreate an event he completed 20 years ago? The answer? He said he wanted to send a message.
If Dave Kunst and John Kunst, two guys from Waseca, Minnesota, can make up their mind, set their goal, set the date, walk out of town, and accomplish this feat, everybody can say to themselves, well, gosh, I would never do that, but it makes me feel pretty good to know that I could do that. I've got two legs. I could do it.
The walk is nearing its end. Kunst had allowed an hour for the mile and a quarter into town. Dutch the mule had seen to it that the walk took less than half an hour. And as they stepped up to the actual spot where the original walk ended, the mule suddenly stopped and did something he hadn't done up until that very moment.
That's where the actual walk started and stopped. The State Theater was right there. Yeah, State Theater. Steady, girl. It's okay. It's okay.
A few steps farther down the road, the recreation came to an end in front of the Waseca City Hall, where the mayor had a plaque waiting. Mayor Judy Kozan's father-in-law was the mayor when the Kunst brothers set out on their original Earth Walk.
Commemorating the 20th anniversary of Earthwalker Dave Kunst. That will be in City Hall.
And so it was over. Years of planning, weeks of publicity, days of traveling. But Kunst was by no means ready to stop thinking or talking about the Earth Walk, not for a minute. As he stood on the steps of City Hall, basking in the warmth of renewed fame, he was already talking about, you guessed it, another return to Waseca.
I mean, I think this is important for Waseca, Minnesota, too. It is the site of the start and finish of the first verified walk around the world. So let's have a celebration. Let's make a big day out of it every year, every 5 years for sure. And that's what I plan on doing.
You're going to come back in 5 years?
5 years, absolutely, for sure. 25 years, we're coming back. Bigger and better, and I hope I have a more docile mule, though, because, no, really, I love that mule. But, you know, mules are spirited animals. They're
See you in '99, Dave.
Kunst says one of the questions people most frequently ask is, what's his next adventure? He says he always tells them the same thing. Once you've walked around the world, what else is there? The news continues after a break.